The life expectancy between Skelmersdale and our rural areas is 10 to 12 years less. So it's quite significant, and that can be over a distance of less than 3 miles. So just to talk a little bit about how we prepared for inspection and what the inspection process was like. We took the opportunity to develop a program of works. Now, we were inspected formally 2 days in November, but our work started 18 months, 2 years prior to that. Just to be clear, I just wanted to mention earlier as well with what was said, our TSM results are not good. They are quite low in certain areas and quite lower than others. So it's not necessarily the correlation exactly as was showing on the screen there. I thought it was quite worth to make that point. And just to make the point as well, just despite our result, we do know we have loads of work still to do. And we made that clear to the regulator right from the start. We were clear and open and honest that says, here's where we are, here's where we've been, here's where we're going. And I think that went down really well. The 2 year program, we created specific roles to drive that change, increase the resources in areas for consumer standards to achieve those standards, but also areas of compliance, such as AWAB's law, damp, and all that type of thing, and in relation to gas and electric. We've recruited new people. We've now got a great team in place who are passionate and dedicated, and that's so important because the work that we've done over the last 18 months has been long and hard. Right from the start, going back to early 23, we made it a council-wide priority. Now, when I first came to West Lancs Council at the end of 22, the housing consumer standards wasn't really an issue for the wider council. We made it an issue for the whole council. And as such, the whole council accepted this is needed to be a full transformation project for the council, not just for the housing service. In early 23, we did a really honest self-assessment, and that was mentioned previously in the other session. We really were honest with ourselves. We critiqued ourselves, we critiqued each other. We also, part of what John said, Campbell came in and supported us with that as well and critiqued our own self-assessment. So again, supported what that was looking like, how we needed to develop that further. From that self-assessment, we developed a housing transformation program, which was going to be a program of about 3 years. We did that over 2 phases. And phase 1 was, what do we need to do urgently in the first 12 months? So we did have a number of real key work streams and areas that we needed to put in place prior to April 24. We did the premise that we will get the call before April and we would be inspected early. So we wanted to push that work as quickly as we could. And they were key areas such as our tenant involvement framework. We were limited in our involved tenants, so we completely refreshed that and increased the number of our tenants involved massively compared to where it was, which has shown a real impact on what we do. Phase 2 is now started. It's got at least another 2 years to run of project work and changes that we need to make within the services that we're and the way we deliver things. There were a number of key work streams, as I said, through that framework, and we have those work streams to do. The work we did on the tenant engagement framework, again, we brought in additional resources to do that, to basically get our tenants involved as much as possible. And everything I'm saying here, I'll be honest, it has cost us a lot of money to do it. And we needed to do it because it was required to have those things in place, specifically with tenant involvement, because we were limited to what that would look like. As we say, we engaged Campbell to Kell to support us with our self-assessment, to review our self-assessment, but also to do a rehearsal inspection with us. So very early on, and this was done early 24, to come in and basically act like the regulator in all ways. And we did ask, it was Catherine and Kerry on the previous screens and calls we had, we asked them to be ruthless with us. So the interviews that they did, we really asked them to push us, which I think really set us up for the actual inspection itself. And I think some of my team might be on this call that wouldn't necessarily agree, but I think it made the actual interview process with the regulator easier because we'd gone through that difficult first round of interviews. We not only did that for our self-assessment, with the results of our TSMs, I think everybody is very similar. The 3 key areas around low TSMs, which have been mentioned, are complaints, repairs, and for ourselves, it was ASB. So again, we utilised external companies to come in and look at how we were delivering those services, do some customer journey mapping for us, particularly around complaints and repairs. And we utilised other organisations to review our ASB approach and did changes within that. So again, that was learning directly from the TSMs and implementing change to that. And that went down really well with the regulator that we'd utilised that information. We did a load of specific training. We revised our structure around repairs, safety, and compliance, and we brought in a whole new structure with new managers, new team. So we did some specific training across the organisation with those managers around challenge and that culture approach for us to be open and honest with each other to allow us to make sure that we're delivering the best we could. And we're trying to push that and have pushed that throughout the whole teams, specifically with the journey mapping we did around complaints, for example, which the key area of focus that came out of that was our lack of empathy, apparently, during those complaints. So again, we've done some training with our contractors, with our teams to make sure we're dealing with those complaints more effectively. We've done, I think, Jane, one of my colleagues is on the call. The amount of desktop research and learning from others we've done over the last 2 years has been just constant. We go to every session, we go to get involved everywhere we can, we speak to whoever we can, and we certainly go and listen to the regulator whenever we can, because that gives some, although they don't give direct learn, I think they give some really good hints about where you need to be. We learn and are now learning from everything that our tenants say. No matter how we receive that information, we are utilising that, pushing it into action plans, pushing it into improvements of how we can do. Prior to inspection, we had executive management oversight of our approach to inspection, and some of the team were coming to the executive meeting fortnightly to update the exec team about where we were with that process, and hence why it became that whole council approach. During the training with Campbell to Kell, we did lots of interviews with members as well. So we got them to interview our lead member as part of the training. And prior to inspection, they did a training session with all members and a further training interview with the leader of the council as well. We also did that training for tenants and our involved tenants around what regulation means and what the consumer standards mean to get them involved in that. All this was going on last year while we moved from a cabinet to a committee structure, which has been painful at times, but also helped us to review our wider tenant engagement structure and our approach to tenant engagement, what we call our landlord services working group. So we've changed that. We've now increased the number of tenants on it and brought in independent into it as well, which helps that assurance around what we're doing. Just briefly on how the inspection went. Just to say, the inspection lasts longer than what you think, or certainly longer than what we thought. We were notified at the end of September that we would be inspected, and we were still being asked for information by up to mid-January. So it was 4 months of intensive expectations and requirements. And when they asked for information, some of it was 2-day turnaround. Certainly after the inspection, it was. I think prior to the inspection, we obviously would have liked more time. I think we'd have been in an even better place if we'd had 6 or 9 months, but ultimately, we're done now. I think all our prep that we did made the actual inspection easier. Certainly the 2 days inspection that we were involved with Campbell to Kell and the work we did there. We'd got everything planned. We planned the actual inspection days months in advance, so we knew what rooms we were going to give them. We knew how they were going to get here. That was all delivered within the inspection plan that we had. The inspection team themselves, we had 5 inspectors on our team because a couple of them were fairly new to the organisation, the regulator, and were learning. So they were really good with us, really supportive throughout the process, kept us informed, kept us engaged, listened to us. We're collaborative around the inspections because we couldn't always get people to the inspection days that they wanted. For example, our lead member couldn't attend the 2 inspection days, so they conducted that interview the week later on Teams with myself, and they were quite happy to do that, just as long as they could do those interviews. They, as mentioned, they worked with the tenants a couple of times on a couple of sessions that we were running. They attended what is our landlord services working group, as well as a scrutiny session, and they obviously spoke to tenants without officers in the room as well, so just make you aware of that. Throughout the whole process for the inspection, going back to what I said before about our challenge, we were completely honest and open with them. Our opening presentation talked about where we were 12, 18 months ago and how poor we looked in compared to the consumer standard self-assessment, what we'd done over those 18 months and what our next 2 to 3 years looked like. The information we gave them all showed that, our self-assessment showed that, so it was quite key. And I think, again, the feedback we got from that was quite good. We didn't massively restrict who they interviewed. If there was a manager for that service area, we put that manager in the room, although we made sure there was always more than 2 or 3 people in the interviews. We never left anyone alone. So there was always that support to do that. I think I attended 6 out of the 8 interviews, not necessarily to get involved, but understand the context no matter what was going on. And our tenants are engaged throughout the process as well. So they were involved through everything we were doing. I think broadly the inspection was as expected, really. Everything that was sent out by the inspector, the scopes were clear. There was no real surprises during the interviews. There was the odd surprise question, which we just didn't expect. And we just couldn't plan for. But obviously we took those on board and done things with them. One of the things we did do during the inspection process, where they asked questions and suggested that we might want to think about our approach, such as one of the examples was put more compliance information on the website. Well, we did that very quickly after the inspection days. So when we met with them again after the inspection, we told them we'd done that work. So again, it was picking up the learning from them and delivering it quite quickly. If there's anything we would do differently, I think if I'd have known we were going to get inspected in November last year, I think we would have pumped prime more resources earlier to try and drive the work that we've got to do much quicker. But ultimately, we do know we've got that journey to take. The key areas that Kerry mentioned in her slides earlier on, I would concur with. Really, it was assurance, culture, and governance were the key areas that they targeted and interviewed us on, particularly around the governance and the insurance were key to them. Tenant involvement was a big issue as well, but those were the key areas. I think that's it for me, John. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Honestly, you make my heart sing with that story because it's primarily about service improvement.
Yes,
And the layers
it was.
and
Yeah,
the layers involved in those service improvement, behavioral layers, as well as the mechanics of service delivery. And then additionally, a bit that's about learning and enacting how to play the regulatory game.
yeah, I wouldn't disagree, John. I mean, the drive that we've got, it isn't, and the culture we're trying to do with the customer journey that I think is about improving the service to tenants, because ultimately that's why we are all here. We'll all say that, but we have made a real drive to do that in everything that we do. And
Yeah.
the other thing has come from that. I mean, I won't sit here and deny we did, some of the work we did in the background, all the preparation work, that if you interviewed some of the team, say, we were working stupid hours prior to the inspection, just trying to get everything ready. But that was playing the inspector game a little bit.
Yeah, well, I've got a note here actually, which is, that I can't stress enough that a balance of 80% service improvement and 20% regulatory method is the way to go. But it won't feel like 20% in the run up to the inspection.
No, definitely not.
Anyway, thank you very much. Now let's hear about life under reactive engagement. So Dawn, Nicola, over to you, please.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. I just need to start by saying that my laptop is desperately trying to update. So if I disappear, that's what's happening. So, but Nick obviously can take over. But so just want to say thank you, everybody, for your time today. We're really delighted to have been asked to give you an overview of our experience, really, of the consumer standards and the regulatory journey. I think what I'd say is that having attended my fair share of webinars, as I'm sure you have, one of the things we often hear mentioned is that it's a journey, and it's definitely something we'd agree with. Um, I think you always know it, but until you start with the engagement, um, you don't recognise as much how much that it is a journey. It's never complete. It is a continuum of improvements, and I think that reflects everything Alan's just said. That there's always something else to do. There's always another improvement to be made. Um, Again, for some background for us, at Nuneaton and Bedworth, we have the highest levels of deprivation in Warwickshire. we're a landlord to just over 5,500 homes. And as we all know, we have to wear many hats, and I think that's it doesn't help in terms of that difference of the C ratings at times. However, for us, housing is a corporate priority, and I was so heartened to hear Alan's story, because it helps us to understand whether or not we're on the right path. Our portfolio holder for housing is also our leader. That's a pain, but a blessing at the same time some days. But both he and our chief exec are highly engaged in the housing agenda. In the run up to regulation, they've attended many of webinars and meetings, and that's helped us immensely in starting to make changes to our governance processes. So we've changed our scrutiny panels to bring a greater focus on housing. And the engagement and understanding that we're getting from that has been pivotal to support many of the other changes and improvements that we've already made, but are still to make as well. But what I'll do now is I'll hand you over to Nicola just to tell you about our self-referral and our learning from that experience.
Lovely, thanks, Dawn. So to provide some context, we actually referred ourselves to the regulator back in July of last year due to concerns primarily around the responsive repair service that we deliver. We had a backlog of repairs. Repairs were not being carried out quickly enough, and the appointments appointments weren't being given every time a tenant rung us to raise a repair. So that really marked a fundamental reset and rebuild for us, as we knew that we needed to improve to be compliant across all areas of the consumer standards and to deliver the services our tenants and leaseholders deserve. So at the outset, I feel that we did have quite a lot of self-awareness. Although we knew our repair service was potentially non-compliant, we also knew that there were other gaps that we needed to fill, especially around the transparency, influence and accountability standard, and in particular tenant engagement. It was at that point that we asked Campbell Tickell to come in and carry out a self-assessment with us. And that led us to look at the housing service that we provide as a whole, including structures, systems, processes, all of those key ingredients that you need to run high quality and effective housing services. As Dawn has already mentioned, we're still very much on that journey in reviewing and improving all of that together. So the self-assessment process really made us think about how we can evidence that we're complying against each standard and be really honest with ourselves about where we actually were at that point. So firstly, we arranged meetings with key staff members, mostly team leaders and managers, to ensure that they had a comprehensive awareness and joint understanding of what the consumer standards are and what the regulator would expect to see from us on inspection. But before going into that self-assessment process, I know I, for one, was quite naive. So, for example, I thought we'd be covered if we had a domestic abuse policy, but it goes much deeper than that. We quickly became familiar with the so what and prove it principles. And it was at that point we started to think about things in a very different way. We questioned everything we did with those principles. So what if we had a domestic abuse policy? We had to demonstrate how that policy was implemented within our operational processes and prove why having that policy was important to have in place. What was it actually achieving? And what evidence did we have that proved that that domestic abuse policy was making a difference to tenants' lives? We then started to build case-based evidence to support this, and we replicated that across all areas of our service. So before approaching the regulator with the self-referral, we knew that we had to get all of our ducks in a row and provide them with the whole picture of our concerns across the whole service, rather than highlighting potential non-compliance just with our repairs. We knew that we needed to complete the self-assessment in one go, rather than going back to them weeks down the line with another set of concerns. and providing that whole picture really did stand us in good stead. We, like yourselves, had an introduction with key staff with the regulator at the beginning of last year. So we knew from that meeting that they wanted us to be open and transparent with them and to let them know immediately if we've had any concerns about potential non-compliance. So when we very first emailed the regulator, we explained that it had become apparent that the way in which we were delivering day-to-day repairs may not represent the effective, efficient and timely repairs, which is part of the safety and quality standard. And specifically, on some repairs orders, we have not been meeting the requirement, which is that registered providers must set timescales for completion of repairs. We told them that we were clear that the degree of non-compliance merited a self-referral on that issue, but they would have to do further work to fully understand the scale and implications of the issue. We also advised that we were undertaking externally supported self-assessment that would enable us to understand whether any other issues existed. At that point, a meeting was arranged to discuss the concerns that we had. So Dawn and I were very nervous about going into that first meeting, but we knew that it was important, again, for us to be open and transparent and not defensive. It quickly became apparent that the regulator were really pleased that we'd come forward with our concerns. And we do feel that we built up a very good rapport with our contacts there. And I also think that they were more reassured that we had Campbell Tickell on board supporting us. So for a few months, we had a lot of data to gather and send across that needed to be analysed. The big six were the areas that they were most concerned about. As mentioned already, gas safety, electrical safety, fire safety, asbestos, water safety and lift safety. Smoke and CO2 alarms, damper mould, stock condition surveys, decency and our Cat 1 position were also topics of conversation. When we collated all of this information, it again gave us the opportunity to question our own performance. We started to ask for more information from our external contractors to provide us with the assurance that what they were telling us was the actual position. We procured new contracts with external auditors to audit our contractors' processes and practices. And this has led to even more improvements being made. And we now have even more assurance of the data that we hold. So one of the things that I think we will take away from those meetings is that the regulator were keen to know what the problems are, how you're going to fix them, when and what mechanisms you have in place as a landlord to ensure that those issues do not rise again. So from the beginning of the process, we were very clear on what our starting position was. We were transparent, we gave a plan on when improvements could be made, and we could evidence that our performance had improved at each meeting. As long as you can demonstrate that you've got a robust plan in place and timescales for completion, they really were quite amenable and understanding. So we implemented a service-wide improvement plan based upon the outcome of the comprehensive self-assessment, which was audited and challenged by Campbell Tickell, and that was sent over to the regulator for their information. The regulator told us that they were aware that we could not make a significant number of improvements in short timeframes and urged us to consider a RAG rating for the plan, which we did. And that was another way for us to be much clearer on what is a higher priority and why. And none of us have a limitless resource in either financial or human. So being able to demonstrate that we had a realistic and achievable improvement plan that has been thoroughly considered via the RAG rating process has, again, I believe, given confidence to the regulator that we can deliver the improvements that we've committed to. So on the 19th of December, we were advised that no regulatory action was going to be taken against us. And we were so pleased. And I'll be honest, I did share a little tear at that point, and the regulator could see that, which again, I think showed them how much we really care about doing the right thing. Our leader, who is also our portfolio holder, and our chief exec attended that meeting too, which was really the right thing to do, as again, that provided assurance that we were taking responsibilities as our landlord seriously. They also reiterated at each meeting that if we have any slippage in performance, to let them know immediately, and this is something that we absolutely will do. So we're still on that journey to continue to work towards a C1. We've still got a lot of work to do, but it's a very positive journey. Our staff are invested in making improvements and encourage each other to say, so what, and prove it every single day. So we're now working more towards getting buy-in from our corporate colleagues and services so that there's a corporate appreciation of how it is for us to be, how important it is for us to be compliant against the standards. Back over to you, Dawn.
Thanks, Nick. I'd just like to say very quickly in wrapping up that so if anybody's old enough to remember the old best value inspections, as I am, this feels very different to that experience, and so far it actually has been. The old regime tended to expect you to deliver services in a certain way. So a lot of consistency across all local authorities, whatever their size, whatever the makeup of their tenant base was. So much more restricted, I think. And I find when we're doing the webinars and such that people are always asking for good practice, and it's almost a slip back to those best value days where people feel much happier with something being prescribed for them. But actually, this is pretty much the opposite, and I do think people need to get their heads around that. So it's really, you need to be able to evidence that what you do meets the outcomes, and start with that. What are you doing, and how is it meeting the outcomes? And be really honest with yourselves. As Nicola said, a policy on its own won't cut it. And Campbell Tickell definitely helped us to understand this with the so what approach. I do remember the meetings that we had with a number of the team going, okay, so you've got that, so what do you do with that? Okay, well, prove that. And it's been so helpful. The regulator, our experience from a self-referral is that the regulator wants to have confidence in you. They're not trying to trip you up. And it is really important to be transparent. And that was one of the key things that John particularly first said to us. Be transparent, don't be defensive. And we absolutely took that on board. So whilst the journey has been nerve-wracking at times, getting your staff, your members and your chief exec on board is key. And despite some of the shock horror moments that we've had so far, everybody sees this as an opportunity to improve and basically do what we're supposed to be doing, which is giving really high quality services to tenants and leaseholders. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Nicola, always a pleasure to hear your story. I think it's a really interesting and it's a different story. It's definitely the case that the first hole that you found was big enough and deep enough that a regulatory judgment could have resulted if the increased regulatory engagement had gone badly. And I think the first key step for me is that for an organisation is not to fail the attitude test with the regulator. You know, if you're cheesed off by their questions, if you're frustrated by their very existence, you know, I mean, I remember my mum lecturing me about this when I first passed my driving test. She said at some point you're going to get stopped by the police, and you know, a part of the how you determine what's going to happen is whether you fail the attitude test with the officer who's stood looking over you at the roadside. And there's an element of that with the regulator as well. I've got a couple of questions. We might only have time for one. We'll see how we go. So we'll start with you, Alan, but I'll come to you, Dawn and Nicola, afterwards. What have you learnt about governance at your end, and what changes have resulted? And are the changes beneficial to service as well as to being beneficial to the regulatory game?
From my perspective, John, we, as part of the committee change and from a cabinet to committee structure, we really took that opportunity to review everything we did. So the new landlord services working group, everything that has got to do with tenants goes through that group, no matter where else it will go, whether it will go to council or to what we call our policy and resources committee. We push everything through that, and they have the oversight and governance to that. The agenda for those meetings are quite long. It's usually 2 to 3 hours. There's lots of information on them. And the governance of everything runs through there around performance, compliance, stock, data, and everything else. Any improvement plans we do, all the scrutiny stuff runs through there. So everything goes to that group, and then it may go on, depending on where decisions are required to further beyond that. But then that pushes then down, our framework pushes then down to wider scrutiny, wider tenant groups, that get involved and push into that information. So we have a two-flow system of information or decision making that runs from tenants to council and back again. And that's part of our tenant engagement framework that we redeveloped and refreshed last year.
That's for me, that's a really strong answer, because if I was going to paraphrase that back, effectively everybody knows in terms of the members where the buck sits. And it's not spread across 4 committees. It's all in one place, and all the lines gravitate towards that point.
Just to add, sorry, John, Don. Just before that, what we also did was we developed an internal assurance framework, which listed all those groups and committees with an outline of what goes where, when, and how often. So it was clear then that what was being reported and had to be done.
Stop improving your answers. Dawn, your reflections on governance?
I think as a local authority, we haven't got it right still. I think there's a number of members who are, I was going to say late to the party, but struggling to get their head around it, because I think all of us, certainly in local authorities, would say that housing has been deprofessionalised for so many years and sidelined for so many years. It really is quite a new thing and a steep learning curve. And for all the pain and the work and the sleepless nights, as a professional, I'm just over the moon that we've got this regime, because it brings us back to where we need to be. We are lucky that we've got the leader as our portfolio holder, and he's been extremely supportive in corralling members of the leading group to get on board. But it's a slow process, and we do have to do more. In fact, John, I was just thinking to myself, I think I need to get John to do some training to our OSP to kind of make that leap forward a bit more quickly. But it is more of a struggle, because as an organisation, we're not just a housing organisation, as a council. And I'd love to be where Alan is, and that's where I strive to be, where everybody's got it. We do have quite a few people on board. Our corporate executive team are on board, but there is an awful lot of work to do still.
Marvellous. Well, my little pop-up has just popped up to say that the breakout room is going to close in an ever-decreasing number of seconds. One final reflection from me is a thing that we've not talked about, is the point about relationships with other departments. Quite often when we go into local authorities, the water has run in the wrong direction for a long time. So housing's paying a fee for customer contact to the finance department, who hold that ball, but there's no service level agreement, and housing's seen as a pain in the bum when it wants changes in the way that calls are handled. That's definitely an issue that we see in lots of places, and that we've got some ideas as to how you can do that better. But I'd just like to thank all 3 speakers. Really fascinating insights, great stories from two very different perspectives, but lots of similarities.